So again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's career conversation. This is an open Zoom call that we host each quarter for anyone who has specific questions about careers in the alternative protein space, or really anyone who wants to learn more about navigating this field in general. So my name is Christina Aguila, and I work as the University Innovation Specialist at the Good Food Institute. I joined GFI earlier this year, and before that, I was a process engineer in the biopharma space, working in contract manufacturing and then in R&D. My formal education was in chemical engineering. I got my master's and bachelor's both from UC San Diego. And then apart from engineering, I was also involved in STEM outreach and teaching and designing science curriculum. What brought me into the alternative protein space was my interest in how industrial animal agriculture negatively impacts our climate. So now at GFI, I'm focused on building up the alternative protein workforce, which involves creating educational pathways for students to learn about these new food systems at their universities. So looking ahead to the agenda, based on some of these questions that I've received so far for this session, it looks like we have a good number of attendees looking to enter the field as scientists, but I know that we also have representation from folks who are interested in non-technical roles. So I will keep both groups in mind throughout this chat. And I'll also make sure to share a mix of resources for those of you who are students, and then those of you who have already started your careers, maybe in other industries. And then just a few housekeeping notes before we dive in. This meeting is being recorded. Since we're in webinar mode, it'll just be my camera and slides that show up in the recording. And then we'll post this recording to our YouTube channel. And in the next few days, we'll send this video link and slides to all of the registered attendees. So just know that I have a bunch of resources linked throughout the slide deck. But this will be emailed to you, so don't worry about copying those all down. So here's how this call will be structured. During the first 30 minutes or so, I'll give an overview of GFI and the alternative protein landscape. I'll discuss career fields and relevant backgrounds, and then I'll share some career-related resources specifically for this field. This first portion should hopefully address some of the most common questions we get, and hopefully it gets us all onto the same page about what alternative proteins actually are. And then with the remaining time, I'd love to answer your specific questions. I'll start out with the questions that were submitted ahead of time, but if you have any additional questions that pop up, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will try to get to these if we have time. Otherwise, I'm going to save the chat and type up the answers and send them to all in the same email as the recording and slides. Okay, that is enough of my preamble. Let's get started. So the Good Food Institute, for those of you who aren't already familiar, we are an international nonprofit building a sustainable, healthy, and just global food system. Using unique insight across the scientific, policy, industry, and investment landscapes, we are using the power of food innovation and markets to accelerate the transition of the world's food system toward alternative protein. In order to do this, we focus on 3 key areas of work. So I'm in our science and technology department, and we work to advance and open source the foundational science of alternative protein. We also have a corporate engagement team that builds relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them capitalize on opportunities in this space. And then lastly, our policy team advocates for fair regulation of plant-based and cultivated meat, and also lobbies for government investments in sustainable protein R&D. What motivates our work is the fact that our current system for producing meat, dairy, and eggs is extremely unsustainable and inefficient. This system exacerbates climate change, environmental degradation, and antibiotic resistance, as well as global food insecurity and issues of animal welfare. And despite more and more people learning about this, we're not seeing enough individuals changing the way they eat. Instead, per capita meat consumption continues to rise globally. So GFI's theory of change is based on this idea that consumers will choose alternative proteins when they are as inexpensive, delicious, and ubiquitous as animal products. So instead of asking consumers to give up the foods they love, we can instead make products that are just as tasty, affordable as conventional meat. Here are a few different ways to produce alternative protein. We can use plants, we can use fermentation or microbes, or we can cultivate it from animal cells. So let's start with plant-based products. And to be clear, I'm not talking about those bright green veggie patties that are made by literally smashing together black beans, edamame, and corn. While I personally kind of love those sorts of products, what's actually game-changing for the field here is this opportunity to create products that actually look, taste, and cook like conventional meats, while offering complex carbs and fiber. So just like this Beyond Meat patty that's pictured here. So Impossible and Beyond Meat are two of the big names in the plant-based sector, but there are plenty of other plant-based brands out there. So if you see an alternative protein product out like in your local grocery store, chances are it's a plant-based product. We also have cultivated meat, which is also known as cultured or cell-based meat. If you hear talk about cellular agriculture, that is also in reference to cultivated meat. And this is produced directly from animal cells. So in short, you start with a small sample of animal cells, you place it inside a bioreactor, which provides the same conditions you would find inside an animal, such as water, warmth, and basic nutrients. And then you can differentiate these into other types of muscle cells and arrange them in a similar structure as animal tissues. And as a result, you can achieve a product that is genuine animal meat with the same sensory and nutritional profiles. So there are already dozens of cultivated meat companies around the world, but they haven't yet reached commercial scale production. Part of this challenge is scaling up these processes and bringing costs down. And then on the policy side, many countries are still formalizing their regulatory requirements to approve cultivated meat for sale. So as a result, cultivated meat isn't sold in stores yet, unless you're in Singapore, which their government was the first to approve these products back in December 2020. And then lastly, we have fermentation, which is an enabling technology that allows for the production of standalone protein sources or functional ingredients. So we can use microorganisms such as yeast or filamentous fungi, and we can program them to express specific proteins or fats. From there, we can either purify or basically isolate these proteins from the microbes to use as ingredients, or we can harvest the entire protein biomass and use that. So it's important to note that in the future, we probably won't see these three distinct production platforms as separate industry segments, but rather as one large industry where we produce alternative protein products across the spectrum. So for example, we often think about the Impossible Burger fitting neatly in the plant-based category, but it actually uses fermentation to produce like hemoglobin, which is that signature ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and meaty taste. However, when we think about the different careers and relevant backgrounds in the alternative protein space, it is useful to differentiate the three production platforms. So for those of you pursuing careers in science and technology, these are, in general, the different areas to explore, whether you're looking at plant-based, cultivated, fermented, or even conventional meat. The production process typically follows these stages. So to source is to choose your inputs, whether it be a plant, microbe, or sample of animal cells. And then you optimize that through breeding, engineering, or changing your culture conditions. There's a stage where you grow the cells. And then at the end, art and science sort of come together to create these end products with the desired taste, texture, smell, and appearance. So we need technological innovation at every stage in this process for each of the 3 production platforms in order to truly accelerate the alternative protein field. And then when we zoom out and view the entire alternative protein ecosystem, we see a much greater diversity of roles, not just limited to science and technology. So that previous slide focused on research and development for inputs, production, and end products that you can see here. However, we need investment to fund all this research. And once we have the end products, we need to establish distribution channels that make these products truly accessible. And then across all of these stages, we're depending on industry enablers such as the labor force, business services, and compliance. That compliance piece is there to ensure that we're meeting regulatory requirements and actually producing food safely. So when folks ask us questions like, what should I study in order to pursue a career in alternative protein, you can start to see why the answer is that it depends. Each segment of this value chain employs many different roles requiring varying skill sets. And then on top of that, this is a new and growing industry. So this means some roles are more in demand now, and we expect other roles to be more in demand later. So now that we've had enough context for the alternative protein landscape, let's actually dive in and explore which backgrounds are relevant for different career fields in the alternative protein space. So I want to start off by sharing that these alternative protein jobs exist across many sectors. If you're a scientist or someone in grad school, then academia is probably the most established or familiar pathway. So research on alternative proteins is already underway at universities around the world, and getting a PhD would allow you to lead your own research group. Also with a PhD, you could become a faculty member and teach the next generation of talent. So increasingly, we're seeing alternative protein courses being offered at universities. And once we establish majors and degree programs, there's going to be a much greater need for instructors. And then there's also this need to train the labor force. In the US, we do this through extension programs that often come out of 4-year universities, as well as vocational programs, which are typically at 2-year institutions. So to instruct these types of training programs, a PhD isn't necessarily required. Sometimes this depends more on industry experience, which brings me to the next sector of industry. The industry is composed of business to consumer and then business to business companies, and that's often abbreviated as B2C or B2B. You'll recognize many B2C brands like Impossible and Beyond, but B2B companies might be less familiar from a consumer perspective. So these might include ingredient companies that sell their ingredients to other food companies, or maybe even manufacturing companies that design processing equipment. So there's a huge range just within those B2B companies. And then there's this option to either create a startup or work at a startup. And then there are also companies that are relatively newer, but past the startup phase. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have established companies that are starting to get into the alternative protein space. So this includes food companies, even some conventional meat companies that are looking to launch like an alternative protein line. And this also includes companies in biotech, biopharma, and other life sciences. And then, as I've mentioned, many of the open positions in the industry right now are for PhD level scientists, but in general, there's a greater variety of backgrounds and education in industry compared to academia. So these companies, just for example, they need to fund their research and operations. So we need folks who can fill these finance and investor roles. The third sector is government, which again can include conducting research in government labs, or you could direct public funding into alternative protein research by working as a program leader or program officer for a government research funding agency, like the NSF, for example. And then if you're interested in policy, you can encourage policymakers to advocate for public funding, or maybe you yourself can be a policymaker who supports alternative protein research funding. And then on the regulatory side, as I said earlier, there's a lot of work to be done to approve cultivated meat for sale in most countries. Again, Singapore is the only one so far that has already formalized their regulatory requirements. And then last but not least, there are nonprofits like GFI, which offer many ways to support the ecosystem at large. So for example, a lot of my work right now is to support faculty members in academia who are building novel alternative protein courses. So formally I work for a nonprofit, but I help support the academia sector. Some other nonprofits include New Harvest, which is focused on cellular agriculture, and then also the Plant-based Foods Association. Coming back to that question of what should I study if I want to pursue an alternative protein career? Again, this depends on your interests, as you'll be more motivated in a role that you find interesting. But if you've already narrowed it down to careers in science and technology, then these are some areas of technical expertise that are currently needed by the industry. And this is not a complete list, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how these three production platforms differ and also overlap. And if you're currently a student, then it might inform which electives you choose. For example, if I saw this chart back when I was a student studying chemical engineering, then I would definitely take electives related to tissue engineering if I wanted to do research in cultivated meat. So presently, there's this high demand for folks with the right combination of scientific expertise and entrepreneurial spirit. However, in order to truly build up the alternative protein ecosystem, additional expertise from all these non-technical fields is also really important. I've already talked about policy, so I'll shout out a few other roles. So for example, as a nutritionist, you can help advise food scientists and engineers to help them make plant-based and cultivated meat actually healthier than conventional meat. Or as a scientific journalist, you can craft compelling narratives about alternative protein that could greatly influence public perception and make people much more likely to purchase these products. So these roles, I just want to emphasize how important they are, because we can reach all of our science and technology goals and come out with these awesome products, but if nobody wants to eat them because of public perceptions, or if they don't think they're healthy, then what good is all that work? So we really do need players across all sorts of disciplines, both technical and non-technical. So I do want to encourage that it can be difficult to forge a path in any emerging field, but nevertheless, I truly believe it's an exciting time to consider a career in the alternative protein space. So we're right in this sweet spot where it's possible to find support and partners but the ecosystem still has plenty of white space opportunities. And then in addition to that, there's this potential for tremendous positive impact across many critical cause areas, including public health, climate change, environmental justice, and global food security. As an emerging industry, there is a greater chance of you becoming a leader in your field and creating a successful career, as opposed to another field that might be more crowded and already have plenty more established players. And then along the way, you'll be learning new things and be on the cutting edge of technology. And particularly if you're someone who thrives at the intersection of disciplines, then this is a really great area to be in. For instance, the European Space Agency recently hired a cultivated meat scientist to explore ways to produce food during long-term missions, which sounds really exciting. Another question we get asked a lot is, what's it like to work at GFI? Short answer, I think it's fantastic. It's really great to get to work with all these other people that are also really passionate and mission aligned. And I could say plenty more, but if you want to learn more, we have general hiring sessions specifically for GFI positions held every other Wednesday. So similar to this careers call, you can pose your questions ahead of time through the document that's linked here on this slide. All right, now it's time for me to throw a bunch of career-related resources at you. So as I mentioned earlier, these slides will be emailed to all registered attendees, so don't worry about copying down all the links. I'm going to start with our tools for exploring careers and companies. So GFI maintains an alternative protein career portal. So this is an up-to-date listing of available positions in this space. And then, oops, sorry, I just got a Q&A chat. Yes, I will drop the links after this portion of the presentation. So we have a alternative protein career portal, and this is a great place to start, especially if you're graduating and looking for a full-time job now. However, the downside is that this only gives us a snapshot of what the field needs at this current moment. So if you're someone that's just starting college and looking for a job in, say, 5 years, then the available opportunities will look different. So again, a lot of postings right now are for senior scientists, but we expect a lot more diverse roles as the industry scales. So to get a broader, more long-term view of industry trends, you could start by exploring our company database, which lists consumer brands, manufacturers, and ingredient suppliers in the alternative protein landscape. So I would honestly recommend lurking through LinkedIn for roles that currently exist at these companies. And if someone's work sounds interesting, reach out to them for an informational interview so you can learn how they got to where they are and what pathway they recommend that you take. We also have a few guides that are just filled with amazing resources and information. So we have a student guide that's geared toward all newcomers to the alternative protein space, not just students. And this is designed to help you navigate the various tools, communities, and databases that are available to you as you explore this emerging field. And then on the right side, we have a startup manual, which lays out the key steps for starting an alternative protein company. There's a lot to learn in here from experts and entrepreneurs. So even if you're thinking about just working at a startup, but not necessarily creating one, this guide could still be incredibly useful for you. And then we have this amazing interview series that profiles a variety of pioneering researchers in the alternative protein space. We asked them how they entered this emerging field, how their background came into play, what challenges they foresee, and then they also offer plenty of advice for folks that are looking to join this future food movement. There is a lot of great insight on how they leverage skill sets from other fields and disciplines. And then there's also representation both from founders who spent decades in other industries, as well as younger researchers who jumped straight into the field after their undergraduate training. So I definitely recommend go get inspired and read this series. And if you're thinking about the academia route, then research funding is an important topic to explore. So at gfi.org/research grants, you can search for funding opportunities both from GFI and then also other agencies. And additionally, you can see what research we're currently funding to get a better idea of what the most pressing questions are that need to be answered and what skills are in demand for those questions. And then these are a few more resources for engaging with the community. If you want to connect with researchers, then you can check out our collaborative researcher directory. This is especially useful if you're wondering like which universities have alternative protein research actually going on, and which of these labs are hiring and accepting student researchers. You can filter by location and whether or not they're hiring. And then from there, you can narrow down your list of researchers that seem relevant to you and start to reach out and figure out either, ask questions like if your background is the right fit, what they recommend you get experience in order to enter this field, and so on. And then to connect with our broader community, not just scientists, but also entrepreneurs, students, and subject matter experts. For that, I encourage you to join the GF Ideas community. And then lastly, you can add yourself to our talent database, which is a resource we share with startups that are looking to expand their teams. All right, one last slide of resources. We're almost there. So 80,000 Hours is a London-based nonprofit that investigates which careers have the largest social impact and provides career advice based on their findings. So this is actually how I found my current role at GFI. If you filter by factory farming, then this will give you a list that includes job postings in the alternative protein space. And then there's also animal advocacy careers, which offers many detailed skills profiles for various animal advocacy roles, including this one here on technical research for animal product alternatives, AKA alternative protein. So something cool to note is that both of these organizations offer one-on-one calls for career advice. You just have to apply. So I believe the application for the animal advocacy careers one-on-one calls is due in September, and then I'm not sure about 80,000 hours, but I would recommend checking those out soon. And then, yeah, that's it for slides. So now I'll move on to answering the questions. And again, I'm starting with the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and I'm seeing a bunch of new questions pop up. So I'll try my best to get through them. And again, if I don't get through them, I will email out answers.